Hey, my name is Maxim Ivanov. We're gonna build a Discord bot today. If you like my videos, then subscribe to this channel, share this video with your friends because it's gonna be a fun one where we use a bunch of cool technologies like Firebase to store the data related to our bot. We're gonna use TypeScript to write our bot. We're gonna use Express.js to create the REST API for our bot. Yeah, we will have to create the REST API for our bot. And we'll use Retool to create the admin panel and Discord.js library to communicate with Discord API. So let's say I'm following the tutorial on YouTube and the instructions just don't seem to work for me. So I'll go to the Discord server and I can use the / command help. Then I need to provide the description of my problem. Can't follow the instructions in one of the videos. There is such and such problem. Boom. Now the bot sends you a personal message that only you can see. You can dismiss that message. And also it creates a thread. In this thread, bot lists the user and also the problem description. Now the support agent can open the admin panel. Let's see what were the latest open tickets. Can follow the instructions in one of the videos. There is such and such problem. Okay, let's start the conversation. Don't worry, help is on the way. Enter. And we send the message. If we go back to the Discord, we see this new message here. We can reply, all right. And let's say the issue was somehow resolved. The issue is gone. Thank you. We go back to the admin panel. We can pull the messages and it says, all right, the issue is gone. And now we can resolve the ticket. We click resolve, we wait a little bit, and now the conversation is marked as resolved and the thread is archived. If we go back to Discord, you will see that there is indeed this message about the conversation being marked as resolved, and also the thread is archived. So this bot allows you to file the support tickets, keep track of the conversations, and when the tickets are resolved, the problems are solved, you can mark them as resolved in the database and archive them. Now let's have a little overview of how our application will work. So the bot itself will use the Discord.js library to communicate with the Discord server through the Discord API. We'll have an Express server built into our bot so that the Retool admin panel would have access to the Discord messages and would be able to send Discord messages. Here Retool will save us a lot of time because we won't have to code much. We'll just need to put the visual elements in the interface builder and connect them with the queries. And working this way is much quicker and less mentally demanding than, say, writing a React application. Here I must also say that this video is sponsored by Retool, but in my videos I only use the products that I genuinely like. And I actually liked working with Retool. You will find the link to Retool in the video description. And also we'll use the Firebase client to be able to store the information about the support tickets in the Firebase Firestore. And our Retool admin panel will also have access to Firebase Firestore, so we can list the support tickets, edit support tickets, remove support tickets, and do anything with them. Our bot will be written in TypeScript and we'll host it on Heroku. So let's begin. And first thing you want to do is you want to bootstrap a TypeScript project. Create a new folder. Make dir helpdesk bot. We go into this folder. Here we initialize a new npm project, npm init -y. This command creates a package.json file. Then we want to make sure we use the right node version. I'm going to use version 16.6.0. So I'm going to say nvm, and you can use another node version manager. I'm just going to stick to nvm. Nvm install 16.6.0. We can also output this node version into the nvm-rc in the root of our project. So we can say echo v16.6.0 to nvm-rc. This will help if we'll want to share this project and help our colleagues use the same node version as we are using. Let's open our project in the text editor. We've already specified the node version in the nvm-rc. We can also do this in the package.json. We can say engines, and supported engine is node more or equals to 16.6.0. Now, let's install the dependencies. We'll start with the dev dependencies. I'm going to install them using yarn add --dev. We'll need TypeScript. I'm going to be using specific versions to make sure that, well, to increase the chances that this tutorial will also work on your machine. So TypeScript that I'm going to be using is 4.4.4. I'm also going to be using NodeMon package. This is for hot reloading. It will allow me to restart the node script every time the code changes. The version is going to be 2.0.15. I'm going to use the package called concurrently so that I can run TypeScript in watch mode and compile my TypeScript into regular JavaScript code, and at the same time run the nodemon that will run the JavaScript code. So we're using concurrently version 6.4.0. And these are the most important ones to run our project for now. Let's install them. Alright, now we can install the regular dependencies. We'll need Firebase, Express, .env, and Discord.js. Yarn add Firebase. I'm going to be using 941 Express. We'll need it to create the messaging gateway between the Retool admin panel and the Discord server. Express version 4.17.1.env. We'll use this package to load the environment variables, and we'll need, for example, the Discord authentication token, the channel ID, the application ID, and all that will store in the .env file. So .env will allow us to load those environment properties. And the version is going to be 10.0.0. And we're also going to use the Discord.js client. Discord.js at 13.3.1. Alright, and we've just installed Express, and as far as I remember, Express doesn't include the types. So we'll need to also install another package called types express. Yarn add dev types express at 4.17.13. Alright, let's say we're done with the dependencies for now. Let's initialize our TypeScript project. To do this, we'll need to create the tsconfig.json file. We don't have to do this manually. We can use the tst-init. It will create this file for us. Here you go. We don't need to change much. A lot of those settings that are default, that kind of make sense. A few things that we are going to change are the outdir. This is the output directory that we're going to use for the build version of our project. It's going to be build. We are going to change the root dir. In our case, it's going to be src. This is where all the source code written in TypeScript is going to be located. And that's basically it. Now let's set up hot reload. To do this, we go to package.json. We remove the test script from here. We defined build. It's going to be tsc start. It's going to run node build index.js. We define dev. This is where we're going to use this concurrently and nodemon packages. Concurrently, we want to run tsc-w, which means that we want to run it in watch mode so that every time the source files change, it compiles them to JavaScript. We also want to run nodemon build index.js. Now let's create the src folder. Here we create a new file, index.ts. And for now, let's just log a message. Console log hello Discord bot. All right, let's try launching our application. Yarn dev. All right, and we have an error. That happened because we didn't have the build folder yet. Now it seems to be working after we restarted our app. At this point, you might want to create a Git repository because later, when we're going to deploy our bot, we will use the deploy through Git option to deploy the bot to Heroku. So let's stop the server, run git init. And yes, we want to add the node modules to gitignore. We also want to add the .env file that we'll create in a second. We can just add it to gitignore in advance. We do it because we don't want our secret keys to get exposed through our Git repository. And we also want to add the build folder. And I think that's enough for now. Let's add our files. Git add everything, git commit, initial, setup. All right, now it's time to connect to Discord. Create that .env file that we've just added to the gitignore. Create new file, .env. And this file will store 3 environment variables. It's going to be Discord token, the auth token specifically for our bot. It's going to store client ID. This is the ID of our application, and the guild ID, which is our server ID. Now let's get all those variables. We'll start with the guild ID. To be able to get your guild ID, you want to go to the user settings, advanced, and enable the developer mode. Now to get the server ID, you just right-click the server you're interested in and copy the ID. After you have the guild ID, go back to the .env file and paste it here instead of the placeholder. To get the client ID, you want to go to discord.com developers applications and either create a new application or select the one that you had created before, and you copy the application ID field. Copy this value and paste it as a client ID to the .env file. The last value that we need is the Discord token, and to get this value, you go to the bot tab in your application information, and then you generate and copy the token. Paste it in the .env file, and that should be it. We will have all the environment variables. All right, let's say you have all the environment variables set up. One last thing before we start programming our bot is we want to install this bot on our server. Discord uses bit flags to specify the permissions, so you send an integer value that represents a bunch of flags that you want to allow your bot to have access to, and it might be cumbersome to calculate, but luckily they have this calculator. We want our bot to send messages, create public threads, send messages and threads, probably manage threads. We also want the bot to read messages and view channels, and possibly more. After you have this permissions integer, you construct an authentication URL. In this authentication URL, that should be discord.com auth to authorize, you specify the client ID, which is the ID of your application. You specify the scope, that should be bot. You specify the guild ID, which is your server ID, and you specify this permissions integer. Let's say I'm adding it to my Discord server. It's gonna list all the permissions that I've specified in this integer, and then I click authorize. All right, now we have our config variables in the .env file. I suggest we create a config.ts file inside of the src folder so that we'll be able to have a centralized place that will verify that we don't have any missing environment variables, and also provide a convenient way to load them from other modules. Create a new file, src config.ts. Inside of this file, we're going to use the .env package that we've installed earlier, import .env from .env. We want to run .env config to load the variables from the .env config. Now we get the client ID, guild ID, and Discord token from the process env const client ID, guild ID, Discord token from process env. We add a condition. If there is no client ID, or there is no guild ID, or there is no Discord token, then we throw a new error. Missing environment variables. Now we create a new constant config that is going to be a record with keys of type string and values of type string. And here we'll store the client ID, guild ID, and Discord token. Now we can define the default export default config. All right, now we can be certain that any of the variables that we're going to need will be present in our application. Otherwise, there will be an error saying missing environment variables. Let's just remember to always get access to them through the config.ts. Now, let's define the code for our bot. Create a new file, bot.ts. And here, first of all, we want to import the client from Discord.js library. Import client from Discord.js. Even though the library is called Discord.js, it has built-in TypeScript support, which is awesome. Now, we want to import the config, import config from the config module that we've just defined. We want to define a new instance of the client, and we'll also export it so that later we can use it in our REST API. Export const client equals new client. Here we must provide a list of intents or permissions that our bot requires. So here we provide an array. We want the guild's intent, guild messages, and just in case so that it would be possible to send a direct message to our bot, we also want direct messages. Then we add an event listener, client once ready. We add a callback, and here we'll just log a robot emoji, Discord, bot ready. Our bot must listen to interactions, and slash commands are interactions in terms of Discord API and Discord.js library. So we add another event listener, client on interaction create. Here we provide an async callback that will receive an interaction. Here we want to verify that it's a command. So if interaction is not a command, don't forget about this exclamation mark in this check to negate the isCommand value. Then we return and do nothing. Otherwise, we get the command name from the interaction. And if the command name is ping, we return interaction reply pong. And after we have all that set up, we can call client login config discord token. Go to the index.ts, remove the console log from here, and import the bot. Before we can launch our bot and send our first command to it, we need to register the /commands, or in our case, at least the ping command that we're going to be using here. To do this, create a new file, deploycommands.ts, src, new file, deploycommands.ts. Here you want to import the REST from Discord.js REST library, import REST from Discord.js REST, and we actually need to install this library. Yarn add Discord.js REST. You want to import the routes from Discord API types v9, and we want to import the config. Import config from the config module. Create a list of commands, const commands equals an array. Here we create a new command with name ping using /command builder. New /command builder. We import it from Discord.js builders. Import /command builder. This /command builder is chainable, so we can set name on its result to be ping. We set the description replies with pong, and now we can register this command. To do this, we'll need to create the REST instance equals new REST. We use the 9th version of the API, version 9. We provide the token, set token config discord token, and now we call the put function, REST put, to register our command. We get the route to do this from the routes application guild commands. We'll need the client ID and the guild ID. We specify the body to be commands. This put function that we're calling here will return a promise, so we can call then. So after it's executed, we log successfully registered application commands. And if something goes wrong, we catch and log, or we error the error. Console error. All right, now we want to call this register thing. To do this, we'll need to create a new script in the package.json. We're gonna call it deploy commands, and this script is gonna call tsc without the -w flag, because we don't want to watch it, we just want to build it, and then immediately call node build deploy commands.js. All right, let's call the deploy commands script yarn deploy commands, and our ping command is deployed. This means that we can actually run our bot now. Now, if we launch our bot, yarn dev, Discord bot is ready. We go to Discord, we type /, and we see that our help desk bot has the ping command. If we enter ping, we receive pong as a reply. Good. Now let's define the help command. At this point, our bot needs to support both ping and this new help command. To help ourselves to keep the code organized, let's create a new folder inside of the src. Let's call it commands. Here we define our ping command, ping.ts. It's gonna look like this. We import the /command builder from the Discord.js builders, and we are gonna export two things from this module. We're gonna export the command data for the deploy script, export const data, and after we do that, we also export the execute function, but that's a bit later. First, we export the new /command builder, set name, ping, set description, replies with pong. We have the data, now we export the async execute function. Export async function execute. This function will receive an interaction, command interaction. We import it from Discord.js. And as a response to this command, we're gonna return interaction reply pong, just like we've promised in the command description. Now we want to update the bot a little bit. Instead of manually processing this ping command here, we want to process all the commands that we might add to this commands folder. So we import everything as command modules from commands. And to be able to do this, we also want to export everything from commands. So don't forget to add the index.ts, where you will, for each of the command files here, re-export their contents as the command name. So for example, for the ping, we export everything as ping from ping. Go back to the bot. Here we already imported everything as command modules from the commands. So everything that this index.ts file exports. We define the commands object const commands equals an object created from command modules. Inside of the interaction create handler, we remove this if command name equals ping, and instead we're gonna call the execute function from the commands, command name, execute, and we pass in the interaction. And just in case, we also send in the client. We don't need this for the ping command, but we are gonna need this for the help command later. Alright, now our bot can handle a bunch of different commands, but we need to edit the deploy command script so we can support deploying all the commands from the commands folder as well. Now, instead of hard coding the ping command in the commands array, we want to define commands as an empty array. We want to import everything as command modules from commands, and for module of object values of type any of command modules, we run commands push module data. Ideally, we don't want to use the any type here, so we can check what is the type of the data here. It is a /command builder. Let's define a new type, command. We define the field data that is going to be /command builder. Now we say that it's going to be a command, and that's it. We are ready to implement the help command. In fact, we can implement as many commands as we want, and it's going to scale perfectly. We just add new command files into the commands folder. So let's do this. We create a new file, we call it help.ts. For speed, we can paste the contents of the ping command. We can just remake it to be help. The description should be creates. And we also want this command to receive an option. And this option has a type string. So we call add string option. We specify a callback that will receive this option value. And on this option, we set the name. It's going to be description. We set the description. And we say that it's going to be describe your problem. And we also say that this value is required. Set required true. And we format the document. Okay, we'll deal with the execute part a bit later, but now we want to make sure that we export the help function along with the ping. Everything as help from help. Now we want to deploy our commands. Yarn deploy commands. Oops, we've got an error. Let's see what's wrong with this type, and it seems like this new help command actually has type omit /command builder add subcommand group. So it seems like after we've used add string option, the type made sure that we wouldn't be able to call add subcommand or add subcommand group. And this distinguishment might be useful in some other case, but not in our case really. And I suggest we stop being so specific about the data that we get. We just care about the existence of this field. So we can say that data is just unknown, and it should work now. Let's try executing deploy commands once again. It worked. Now we launch the bot. We open Discord, we type /, and now we have this help command that requires a description. And as this description is required, if we press enter without sending it, we'll get a message. This option is required, specify a value. Good. That's a good progress. Let's go back to the code and implement this help command now. Our help command code is going to be in the commands help.ts execute function. If you remember, in the bot.ts, when we call the execute function, we send the interaction that we get from Discord client, and we send the client itself. So let's go back to the help.ts and make sure that our interaction actually supports the client argument. Client is going to have type client. Let's import it from the Discord.js. This command is going to do a bunch of things. First of all, we want to reply to the user and tell them that help is on the way. We want to create a new thread, and we want to post a message in this thread with the username, the name of the user who requested help and created the ticket, and the message, the description of the problem that they've sent with this command. So first thing that we want to make sure is that this interaction has a channel ID so that we can work with this channel. If interaction, or rather if not interaction, channel ID, then we just return. We want to have the channel ID. Then we get the channel. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to export this execute function, otherwise it won't work. To get the channel, we're gonna await for the client channels. Channels is a channel manager that has the fetch function, and we pass in the interaction channel ID here. Now we might have channel, we might have null, so we want to check if we actually got the channel. If not channel, And here we also should check that it's guild text channel. If it's not guild text, and you can get a bunch of suggestions if you check the type of the type field. So for example, here we are protecting ourselves from listening to interactions in the threads. So if it's not just a guild text channel, or if the channel doesn't exist, we just return and do nothing. Next, if it's a channel, if it's a text channel, we want to create a new thread. Thread equals await. We treat channel as text channel. Unfortunately, at this point, TypeScript does not deduce that. If we have this condition, then at this point, channel can only have type guild text, and it's only text channel. So we have to provide this type information manually. We call the threads manager, and we call create method. We pass in the name of the thread. We're going to use a template string here, support, and date now. So we are using date now as an ID here. And the reason for this thread is support ticket with a date now as an ID. All right, we have the thread. We'll be able to send messages into the thread a little bit later. Now we want to get the problem description. Const problem description equals interaction options get string description. If we check the type, then it's going to be string or null, but the funny thing is that it's not going to be null. It's a required field, and we can expect that it's going to only be a string. So if we add an exclamation mark after the get string, we will make our expectations more positive. So if we check the type now, you will see that it's a string. There is no possibility of it being null. And we do this only because we've already set required to true, so it's reasonable to expect from Discord to only send us this interaction with some value in the description field. All right, now we can get the user from the interaction. User equals interaction, and we use the destructuring assignment here. And now we send the message to the thread. Thread send. We can use markdown in the messages. I'm using the bold text here, and I'm gonna send at, and then here placeholder user, and then bold text problem and the problem description. Here we'll want to create the ticket and store it in the Firestore. We're gonna implement this, but a little bit later. So for now, I mark it as a to-do, and I return an interaction reply with content help is on the way, and I mark it as ephemeral. Ephemeral means that this message is gonna only be seen by the user who requested this help, who actually initiated this interaction. Let's save the file, run the bot, send the help message, test. We got the message help is on the way. It's ephemeral, we can dismiss it. The thread is created. We see the user mentioned here, it's me, and the problem for now is just test. All right, let's set up Firestore. Go to Firebase console, click add new project. Let's call it help desk bot. Click continue. We don't want Google Analytics. Create new project. The project is ready. We can click continue. We want to set up Firestore database. Click create database. We start in test mode. For now, we don't care about security. You can fix it later. Click next. Set the location. Click enable. And after it's done provisioning, you should be good to go. To connect our bot to Firestore and be able to create tickets there, you want to go to the project overview, click on the web application, name your app somehow, help desk bot. We don't want Firebase hosting, click register app, and you will get a bunch of values. You want to copy them. Actually, you can copy the whole thing here. Create a new file in the src folder, call it Firebase TS, paste the values. We want to remove all the comments from here. Get the database, const db equals get Firestore from the app. You can import the get Firestore from the Firebase Firestore Lite. And of course, to work with Firebase, make sure that you have Firebase installed. Here I'm using version 9.4.1. Go back, and to make it easier to work with our application, we want to abstract creating tickets. So we're going to create a function and export it. Export async function create ticket that is going to receive a thread ID. It's going to be our ticket ID. Going to have type string and text string. Inside of this function, we're going to have a try catch block. If any error happens, we just catch it and console error, and we say error adding document, and we log the error. And what we try to do here is we await to add the document. We set the collection in the database to be tickets, And the data is going to be thread ID, text, and open it, add. And here we pass date. This is going to be a timestamp when the ticket was created. We want to import the add doc and the add collection from the Firestore Lite. Add doc and import collection. That's it. Now we can go to the commands, help, and here where we've added the to-do previously, we're going to call await create ticket thread ID. We pass in the ID of the thread that we've just created here. And we pass the problem description as the text. Don't forget to import the create ticket. And start the bot. Yarn dev. Go to the Discord, type in the help command, new ticket. The thread is created. Now we go to Firestore and we can verify that there is a new collection called tickets. There is a new document in it. It says new ticket. It has thread ID and it has the opened add timestamp. Great. At this point, we can start working on our admin panel. To save time, I'm going to be using Retool to create the admin panel. I'm going to sign in, create new blank app, help desk admin panel, create the new app. And you will see this app creation interface that by default will have a bunch of things defined for you. We can just remove that table for now. Yes, I'm sure we want to remove it. And also we don't need the Postgres query. First, let's remove the panels that we are not using. And we're going to need a table. We'll just create it from scratch. It's going to represent our tickets. We also want to have a text in the header. We can search for the elements, text, add a new header. In the inspect panel, we can enter Markdown. And that means that I can enter a heading level 1 saying Discord help desk. Let's make it a bit bigger. Now for that table. In Retool, what you basically do is you connect the UI elements provided by the platform with the data using queries. So let's hide the inspector for now. To populate this table with our support tickets, we'll need to create a query that will fetch the data from the Firestore. To connect to the correct Firestore application, we'll need to create a resource. It is done on the resources page. We click create new resource. We select Firebase. Let's call it help desk Firestore. An interesting thing about the Firebase resource on Retool is that even though we're only going to use the Firestore for our project, they still require you to register and provide the Firebase database URL. So to get the database URL, you need to create the real-time database, and after it's created, you can copy it from the data page. Select it, copy, paste into the Firebase database URL input. You will need the Firestore project ID. You can get it from the Firestore. Here, helpdesk bot dd6bb. Help desk. Actually, we can copy this part from here because this is exactly the ID that we're looking for. And in order to get the private key, you want to go to project settings, service accounts, and then generate new private key, paste it into this input. You can test the connection. You should see connection success, and then you save the changes. And now we go back to the application. We create a new query that will fetch all the tickets. Resource query, we call it get tickets. We select the resource to be a helpdesk Firestore. Leave the run query automatically when inputs change. Service type Firestore. Action type query Firestore. Collection ID. We can use the raw ID here and say tickets. And we can preview the query. Okay, and we got a ticket. If you remember this text, new ticket, and thread ID, that's exactly what we had in our Firestore. And that's the ticket that we've created using our bot. Good. Now back to Retool. We can edit this table, and instead of the hard-coded data, we will now get the data from the get tickets query. Get tickets data. Oh, we forgot to save the query. All right, and actually it worked. And in our table, we already can preview the tickets that we get from the Firestore. We have a bunch of fields that we don't want to see here. We can hide them easily using this eye icon. We don't want to see the ID, and we don't care about the metadata. All right, in our app, we can now get the list of tickets, and we want to be able to click on them and and open the modal window where we'll be able to keep the conversation with the users. To do this, we open the right panel, we look for modal, we add the modal button here, right below the table. We want to keep it hidden by default, so we set hidden to true. We can also specify modal height to 600 pixels. That's an arbitrary number. I just found out that for me it works better for this specific case. Now, in order to open this modal, we can click on this button, but as we want to open it when we click on the tickets, we'll want to click on the table and add an event handler. You scroll the inspect panel up until interactions, add a new event handler. Event, we want row click, and here we want to run script. We can always open the script in a separate window. Here we can write the code, and here we call modal1, and you will get automatic suggestion, open. Click done, try clicking on the ticket. Now we get the modal to open. All right, now we want to show the messages history, the refresh button, resolve ticket button, and the send message input. Let's open the modal. We want to add a list view to this modal. Look for a component, list view. Add it here. We can make it 100%. Here we'll drop the text. And as you can see, we already get 3 text values. That's because the list view already controls the amount of elements that it renders. For now, the number of rows is hard-coded, and we're not going to change it right now. We will just change the styles. So for the messages, let's just set the background to blue for now. And also make them a bit wider so that they kind of take the whole list view. We also want to add a text input to be able to send the messages. We will hide the label. The placeholder will be message. And then press enter to send in parentheses. We also want to add a button. There should be no text. And the cool thing is that we can actually use a predefined icon. Let's look for the reload. I think this would work. Okay, let's make it a bit smaller. Move it up. And the last button that we want to add is to resolve the ticket. Let's add another button and call it resolve ticket. All right, the UI is kind of ready. We can click on the ticket. We will see this messages list. We will be able to refresh the messages. We will be able to send them new messages, and we'll be able to resolve the ticket. Let's create an API. Let's create a REST API in our bot so that our admin panel can communicate with the bot directly. One more thing before we switch to the code, let's edit the list view properties. As you can see, the messages will have too much space between them, and the height of each row should be 1. All right. And also let's make the heights dynamic. Okay, that looks much better. Now let's go back to the code. And what we want to do now is we want to define the REST API. Inside of the src folder, create a new file, REST API.ts. Here we want to import the client type, client and thread channel from Discord.js. We also import the express from express, and we export a function that will create our express application. Export function create REST API. Here we'll receive a client. Remember that in the bot.ts we exported the client here. We will use this exact client inside of the create REST API function. The type is going to be client, and then inside of this function we define a const app. It's express. We want to be able to parse JSON responses, so we specify app use express JSON, and we want 3 endpoints. So one endpoint to get the list of messages in the thread for the given thread ID. We want to be able to post a message, and we want to be able to resolve the thread. So let's start with getting all the messages. App get, we're gonna process the get request, messages, async, rec, res. And keep in mind that right now we're not adding any protection mechanism, no authentication, no authorization. And in production, of course, you will want to check that the user that is requesting the messages or posting the message actually has the right to do this. But that's a topic for another video. Right now, we're gonna accept requests from any service. Just keep in mind that in your application, you will probably want some form of authentication. Okay, so here we want to get the thread ID from from request query, we want to check if there is no thread ID. Then we return response with status 400, and we send a message missing thread ID. Now, we have the thread ID, we can fetch the thread from the client. Thread equals await, client, channels, fetch. We pass the thread ID, and maybe we want to cast it to a string. And we also need to cast the type of this channel to a thread, because those types have different properties, and we'll want them to be able to fetch the thread messages. So it's better if we just cast it to thread channel, because by default, I think it's going to be just a regular channel, and we don't want this. So if we don't have a thread, we also return an error status, but in this case, we're going to return 404, and we say thread with this ID was not found. Good. Now we can fetch the messages. Const messages equals await thread messages fetch. And if we got the messages, we can return a new response with status 200, and we send JSON stringify messages or an empty array, just in case if we didn't get any messages or the thread was empty. All right, now we can get the list of messages. Let's add an endpoint to be able to post messages, and we do app post to process the post requests. Post message, there is going to be an async handler that is going to get request and response. Inside of this handler, we're going to get thread ID just like in the previous one, so we can just copy and paste it, but we also want to get the text of the message that we'll post in the thread. Now we need to check both thread ID and text. I'm gonna copy the thread ID from the previous function, and at this point it's probably better to refactor the app a little bit, because we already have some repetition, and maybe we want to introduce a check properties function or something like that that would allow us to check any property and return status 400 if it's missing, but let's keep it simple for now. So we check if the text doesn't exist, we say that the text is missing. All right, now if there is a thread ID, if there is text, we still want to get the thread. Now, if there is no, actually we can copy this part as well, and it's a good candidate to be extracted to a separate function. We got a thread, we checked if it exists. Now we can call await thread send text. Oh, and here, actually, it was a mistake to copy without thinking, because we want to get the values from the body, because it's not a get request, it's a post request, and we want to parse the body to get the thread ID and text values. All right, but we've sent the message to a thread. Now we can return response status 200, and we send a message sent. Awesome. Last thing, we want to be able to resolve the thread. App post resolve. Again, an async query request response. Here we can copy again the whole thing, getting the thread. I would really just extract it to another function, but for this tutorial it just doesn't matter. But if you follow this example, then I would probably suggest just extract this part to a separate function, so you don't have too much repetition in your code. Now, if you don't have a thread, we return 404, and if we have it, then we do several things. First, we send a text, but instead of sending a text from the request body, we now send a hard-coded message. This conversation is marked as resolved, and this thread will be archived. After we send it, we can actually archive the thread. Await thread set archived. True. And after it's done, we can return res status 200 send thread resolved. One last thing is to return this app. It's very important. Make sure to use request body and not query, because that's another post request, just like the post message. Good. And we have the REST API. We want to use it now. The way we're going to use it is we go to the index.ts, where we previously were only importing the bot, but as you remember, it's actually providing us with the client reference. So we will change this import to be import client from bot. We import create REST API from REST API. Now we define the port Here we're gonna get the port flag or port value from the environment, process and port or 8000. This is required for Heroku to work because it will actually provide an arbitrary or a random port, something that might actually change with every launch of your dyno with your app. And locally, we just want to have either 8000 or also we want to be able to provide an environment variable to specify the port on which our application will be running or the REST API will be running. Now we define the API. API equals create REST API. And you remember that this function actually accepts the client that we get from the bot. Now we want to call API listen, and that's the listen function from the Express app. And for those who are familiar with Express, you probably recognize this function already. So we provide the port number and we provide a function, a callback that will log a message. And here we log a template string saying REST API bot REST API is running at HTTP localhost port. Great. Now we want to publish our app to Heroku. You can follow this guide, devcenter heroku.com articles git, to publish your application. We want to add all the changes. We want to commit all the changes, add REST API, and make sure that you've installed Heroku CLI, Heroku create. All right, the app is created. And now we just run git push Heroku main. All right, the app is being pushed. It's building on Heroku. Okay, the app is deployed, and what you want to have now is this URL, because this is where your app is going to be available. And we want to go to the help desk admin panel. We want to open the bottom panel and add a bunch of new queries. Click on plus new resource query. Resource is REST query, action get, paste the address that we got from the Heroku. We want to fetch the endpoint messages and we want to pass in the thread ID. And I think in all the inputs you can use this sort of placeholders with double curly braces. So here we want to get the table 1 selected row data thread ID, and we already get the suggestions for that. And yes, we now have the URL parameters. We could actually edit it here, which would be more convenient. I just forgot that you can do that. I actually think that is it. We can preview our query. We got the response. Now we can rename this query, get thread messages. And we already have this option, run query automatically when the inputs change. And we want to use this query on the messages list. So we open the list view 1 settings. Instead of the hard-coded number of rows, we now use the query value, get thread messages data length. The keys are gonna be this query data, get thread messages data. Now you should see just one message. That's because in our Discord there is only one message in the support thread. To show the text of this message, we need to remove the hard-coded value from the text input and instead use the following layout. We want to have a bold text showing the user ID, get thread messages data author ID, and then we want to have another placeholder, get thread messages data, and we want to use the I here. And I is the index and it's available by default. It's provided by the list view itself. So we don't have to think about iterating over items here. And we get the content field. Done. Okay, and now we have the user ID and the problem description. Good. We show the list of messages, but we want to be able to refresh when we know that there was a new message in the chat. So let's click on the reload button. In the event handlers section, click add new, click trigger query, get thread messages. That's exactly what we wanted, and that have been auto-suggested. We didn't even have to choose anything. Let's try clicking it. Okay, there was some loading indicator. Let's try to do something. Test, reload, and we got the message from the user. Right now we have static background set in the styles. We can change that. Let's open it as a code. And now depending on the author ID, let's show different colors. So get thread messages data I author ID. If it's equal to our app ID, then we show 00FF00. Otherwise, ff0000, and one curly bracket is missing here. Click done, and now we have different message colors depending on the user ID. Now two things left. We want to define the send message and resolve ticket queries. Let's do this. Open the bottom panel, create new, resource query, REST query. We call the query post message to thread. It's going to be a post request. The URL is going to be Heroku app that you've created. Message. We want to run the query when manually triggered. We don't want to send any URL parameters. We want to send the JSON body, that's true. And we want to send the thread ID, that is table one selected row data thread ID. And we want to send the text, that is text input one value. And we also create two event handlers, because when we post a message, we want two things to happen. First, we want to trigger a query, and it's get thread messages. And we also want to clear the text from the message box. So let's create another event handler, trigger query. It should actually be run script. And then here we say text input one, clear value. Good. And the last query that we want is to resolve the thread. So let's create a new one. Actually, we can duplicate existing one. Duplicate. Oh, we want to save it. Yes. Save, duplicate, rename, resolve thread. We can remove the text query param. We keep the thread ID. And instead of message, we post to resolve. We also want to get the thread messages after we resolve the ticket, or we resolve the thread. And we don't really want to clear up the text value, so we can remove the run script part. All right, let's save it. Now we can use the left menu to edit the button 2, I guess. Yeah, it's resolve ticket. We add an event handler, click, resolve thread. Yes, exactly. And we also want to edit the text input so that when we press enter, we trigger a query, post message to thread. All right. And now it should be good. It should be fully functioning. And let's preview our app. If we click on the thread ID, we can send a test message, enter. It sent the message, cleared the input box. Now let's say we resolve the ticket. All right, let's resolve the ticket. Okay, let's close it. The thread is marked as resolved and the thread will be archived, and it's archived. Let's try to create another one. Help, I've just stuck with that one video. Please help. All right, we got a new thread. Let's see if we can find it in the admin panel. Awesome. Actually, I reloaded the page, but I could just click this reload table data button. I can click on it, send a message, help is on the way. Boom. Help is on the way message is here. Hooray, thank you. Reload the page. Oh, reload the messages. Hooray, thank you. And we resolve the ticket. And everything is working. All right, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments what kind of Discord bot are you going to build? What kind of technologies would you choose for your project? And subscribe to my channel, join my Discord server, and see you next time.